Where's my microphone? Sorry about that. I'm always moving stuff around. How are you doing this fine evening? I'm working hard on the definitions. I'm about 80% complete. I myself don't associate with religions because religions are secularized metaphysics. And then people say, well, why were you studying Buddhism for so many decades? Because the original article was not a religion at all. It was a metaphysics, and specifically it was a liberation ontology based in transcendence through disobjectification. That's the whole premise of theurgy, or neti-neti, or apophaticism. I'm not here to discuss religions. I'm actually here to talk about original Buddhism. And what do we mean by original? What we specifically mean is alla sola scriptura, a pre-sectarian reference long before everything else came into presence. I'm not interested in discussing anything that passes off as Buddhism today, which would be those yellow-robed guys in Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka, Burma, Laos, Thailand, those yellow-robed guys. They're specifically called Theravadins. I have absolutely zero interest in anything to do with so-called Tibetan Buddhism, which is a hybrid of Tibetan Bon and much latter-day Mahayanism. And I'm just not interested in any of that stuff that came much, much later. I've been translating ancient Pali now for well over 20 years. And I can tell you some hardcore facts about the original article. But first let me give you a quote from Dr. Anandakitish Kumaraswamy. He knew 27 languages, wrote many, countless dozens of books, and hundreds of articles, and his famous quote is so very accurate too. He said that Buddhism today is most famous for everything it originally never taught. And that is highly accurate. If you were to superficially study Buddhism and like to go onto Wikipedia, for example, which of course is easily one of the most evil and corrupt and upside down and bass-backwards websites on the internet, you would come away with the notion that Buddhism is different than Hinduism. Hinduism is not a religion, by the way. That refers to a people. There's no such thing, not my opinion, it's a fact. There's no such thing as a Hinduism religion. It refers to a people. Buddhism is different than Hinduism, that it taught that there was no soul. And then you'll read something else to countless effects, in short, that say, Buddhism is, all about morality and a lot of other things that it originally never taught, but specifically about the no soul nonsense. If you actually type in on a search, whether it be Bing or Google, type in the word anatta, which is the Pali term, or the term anatman, you will come up with 99.99% of the time stuff that says Buddhism is different than, Hinduism. It taught there was no soul, and this term is anatta or anatman. It's one of the three primary marks of existence: anicca, dukkha, and anatta. And this is absolutely untrue. Not only is this so untrue, it would be as radically insane, and I've never heard anybody say this, if someone were to say something as radically insane as Christianity rejects Jesus. Christianity has nothing to do with Jesus. Like, what? you would, your eyebrows would raise so far up your forehead that would probably fall off of your head if someone said something so completely insane and ludicrous. And yet that very thing is said and comprises 99.99, almost 100% of the stuff that you'll find online if you do a search. And it's not my opinion, a feeling, or belief that that's untrue. It's demonstrably untrue. When we actually make reference to something, we actually have to make reference to a foundation. It's like, what can we say Buddhism was or was not? And people will point to countless things that are not doctrinal, that are not, definitely not pre-sectarian. By the way, the only pre-sectarian corpus, even though they did not all come along at the same time, they're all still pre-sectarian. They're mentioned on the Pillar Edict of King Ashoka and ancient Brahmi Prakrit, which, by the way, I could read. And it mentions the Panch Nikaya, referring specifically to the Digha, Majjhima, Majjhima, Anguttara, Samyutta, and Khuddaka Nikaya. There are older sections of those. Enormous corpus of works such as the Udana, Irivuttaka, Suranapada, Udana, I just mentioned Udana, the Sagatavagapali of the Samyutta Nikaya, Book 1, second book of the Majjhima Nikaya. They're all quite old. Some of the stuff, like the Udana, Irivuttaka, and the Suranapada, are so incredibly archaic that the best Pali translators in the world, of which there are essentially none, they twist their brains to translate, and that is some really tough stuff to translate, I can tell you firsthand. That is a point of reference. Now, since essentially, and this is no exaggeration, 100% of the internet will tell you, Buddhism taught anatta and atma, which means there is no soul. Well, no such passage exists. It is a common via negativa, neti methodology in reference to those things which are not the soul. This is not the soul, that is not the soul. This is objective negation, which of course culminates into subjective synthesis. This is theurgy. This is the methodology of transcendence, or as the ancient Pali refers the passage, Majjhima Nikaya 2.134, I believe. There are 4 occurrences of this. It says, Suvimutta Chatasana Bandham, which means that nirvana is meant the thoroughly liberated nous, or in this case we would say the spiritus sanctum, we say the soul, we say the animus. We could have several different terms in reference to the one thing. We should specifically refer to it as the nous, which is the most philosophically accurate. However, most people don't know the old ancient Greek reference to the nous as the transcendent principle, which is consubstantial to the empirical body. But there are 523 occurrences of anatta. I've got a list in a PDF file anybody could download. I've written many articles on this. And there is no such passage or implication within doctrine that Buddhism taught that there was no soul. Obviously, transcendence, by definition, would be completely impossible if there were not that which is the subject of transcendence. Otherwise, it would be better to suffer endless samsara, which means to go round and round, meaning the cycle of existence, in perpetuity than to blink oneself out into everlasting non-existence, a sort of nihilistic oblivion. And that's not only not any form of religion, which I have no interest in, it's not even any form of metaphysics. And the key meaning of metaphysics is that it is metaphysics, not physics, but metaphysics. And original Buddhism was a liberation ontology, and specifically a metaphysics of transcendence, eliminating out the primordial agnosis or avidya of the false identification of oneself as that which you are not. In kind of a crude analogy, it would be a living or conscious signal that would identify the radio to which it is tuned within. And the radio every day for decades and decades would look in the mirror and identify itself as the radio. But of course it's not the radio. People always say, what happens when you die? So what happens when you actually smash the radio in reference to the signal? And then of course the question has to be forwarded in a kind of obtuse analogy of what if the signal were conscious? What if it were a living entity? Kind of like the artificial intelligence of Terminator, if you will. In that case, the actual signal is of course alive. That's taking the analogy too far, but original Buddhism does not teach any such thing as no-soulism. It does not teach this at all, and that's not my feeling. That's a fact. And yet everything you'll find, and by the way, and this is how this got propagated in the West. I'm a member of the Polytech Society, which is based in England, since translating Pali now for a long time. One of the co-founders of the Polytech Society, the most prolific Pali translator ever, was Caroline Augustus Foley Rees-Davids, and she also said, this was complete nonsense. But prior to her and the formation of the Polytech Society, a lot of Westerners, specifically Germans and English, mostly, there's some French, but mostly English, and these of course were people that had Western empiricist minds, and they were only rooted in Western empiricism. They traveled to India in the early, the 1800s and 1900s. And there was this movement of discovery of new metaphysics. And what they did is they learned this no-soul hierarchy, which is non-doctrinal and completely and wholly unoriginal to original Buddhism from the folks in Southeast Asia, specifically Ceylon, also to Laos, Burma, and Thailand, but mostly from Ceylon. And those guys are Theravadins, who are materialists. And that's a much latter-day sect, which was originally called the Sarvastivadins, which was born somewhere around the 3rd century CE, or approximately 700 years to the death of Gautama, the Sakya. In other words, the founder of what we call Buddhism. By the way, the original term in Samyutta Nikaya 5.4, the only time Gautama refers to his teachings as anything, he calls it Brahmayana, or path to the absolute. So what, said, Lord, Lord, what is your teachings to be called? They call them Brahmayana, path to the absolute. In other words, complete disobjectification leading to absolute transcendence. Nirvriti or nisbandhu literally means to be unbound or to unwind. The winding, of course, is the perpetuation of false identity, or seeing self in what is not self. The most repeated passage in ancient Pali, which is not up for contention or discussion or debate at all, is Isakaya. Namisata. This body is not the soul or my soul. But of course, you say my soul, that implies possession. Something has a soul. And that sort of possessional relationship is obviously metaphysically untenable. But that's the most common repeated passage. And of the occurrences of anatta, which in Sanskrit is anatman, same term, is rupa-anatta, veda-anatta, sana-anatta, sankara-anatta, vinyana-anatta, namarupa-anattati, or the psychophysical is not the soul. Now, you could ask countless questions, which I've done over the decades, to these people who never have an answer. It's like, you know, if Buddhism actually did teach no soul-ism, which of course it does not, you would never say, this is not the soul, that is not the soul, this is not the soul. You would just simply say, there's no soul. You would not waste your breath. Literally the most repeated passage in Buddhist doctrine, over and over and over. Isakaya namisata, rupa-anatta, namarupa-anatta, over and over and over and over repetition. You would just say, there's no soul. It's like someone talked about something, there's no soul. There is no such passage. There is no such passage. There are 4 occurrences of the compound term no soul, which is not anatta, but natata, which literally means there is not or there is no soul, natata. And that is, of course, a heresy. Now, in doctrine it says that is a heresy, which it is a heresy. It is a position of nihilism. So, well, that's Uttritavada in ancient Pali, or nihilism. But they'll say, well, if you believe in a soul, then that's Sasaravada. Well, Sasaravada is not about the soul, it is about perpetualism. And specifically today we call that Karmayana, which means there's no way out of samsara. The only thing you do is good deeds, so that you're perpetuating yourself to a better position either in this life or the next. Sasaravada has nothing to do with the soul. So that's the trick the Buddhists will always try to pull on someone who's not well healed in ancient Prakrit doctrine. When who is? Who is? The answer is nobody. Well, there's me and a very small handful of other people in the world, 95% of which are Theravadins. Independent people that translate Pali is basically non-existent. It's like, who wants to do that? It doesn't make you any money. Nobody cares about it. Who wants to know all those little gritty details that make up the totality of the picture of the truth? Who wants to know the truth? Well, I don't want to know the truth. People are not truth seekers by and large. Also, too, it affronts people. The fact that Buddhism was in no way, shape, or form original. There is not a single thing original within or of or a part of. But when Buddhism manifests in the 6th century BCE, the Upanishadic doctrine and the monistic metaphysics of transcendence ontology, or i.e. disobjectification with the psychophysical, which perpetuates. Hegel called this an identification phenomenology, which of course is true, that one identifies falsely as that which you are not. And that of course is the basis of suffering, which is primordial, i.e. the primordial or extrinsic attribute of the Absolute. But there's nothing original within Buddhism, and that affronts people, and it shouldn't. They think, well, this is something new. Well, there's nothing new underneath the sun. People say, well, that's really old. You know, it must have been... No. Even the 6th century BCE, 2,600 years ago, still there's nothing new under the sun. There were only misapprehensions of like the Naganta Natiputras. Was the founder of what we today call Jainism, the Buddhists and the Naganta Natiputra sect. Debated in debating halls the ancient form of movies. You know, since they didn't have movies back then, is they would get two masters, kind of like a boxing match. And there would be a battle of the wits, and all the townsfolk would come all around, and it's like, who's way wiser? Battle of the wits, not literal battle. And they would go from town to town, these people, they would be debating masters. And this is how a lot of people honed their skills, and this is how a lot of the early religious and sectarian sects were manifest in these debating halls. The only place that that tradition is still carried on today is in Tibet. Debate doesn't mean fight or argumentation, it means debate. Americans and Europeans are extremely mentally confused when you mention the word debate. They think a debate is an argument. A debate is not an argument. Americans and Europeans really have that messed up in their head big time. But I'm here to tell you, as someone who's been translating ancient Pali now for over 20 years, there is no such thing as a no-soul doctrine in Buddhism. It doesn't exist. It's not my feeling that it doesn't exist. It doesn't. A very helpful tool for me to do this is a digitized search engine where I'm actually able to type in the Romanized Pali and look up terms and their contextual usage. I can find any compound of any term, find every occurrence of it instantly, because there are many, many, many countless thousands of pages within the Digha, Majjhima, Anguttara, Samyutta, and Khuddaka Nikaya that make up the pre-sectarian corpus of original Buddhism. I even don't like the term Buddhism, by the way, because you should call it what Gautama called it. He called it Brahmayana, or Path of the Absolute. But the original metaphysics, when you're reading the Pali, it's absolutely golden, it's pure, it is unsullied and unstained by all because if you were to go to a bookstore and you were to go to the section on Buddhism, everything on that shelf has nothing to do with Buddhism. It is a bunch of latter-day, New Age, hooey, malarkey, woo-woo nonsense talk about something that is completely unoriginal, has nothing to do with the original article. It is about morality and nihilism, and it's just like soul-denying nihilism. You know, be a good person. It's like it's literally a type of moralism, and I'm not knocking that. I don't really care, but that's not what original Buddhism was. Some people actually don't care, and these people are not truth seekers. Like, you know, none of that stuff is original. Well, I don't care. It makes me happy. Well, that's good, but I mean, so you have no interest in what the original actually said? No, I don't care about that. Those people, to me, are amazing, and amazing not in a good way. You actually don't want to, I don't want to know that stuff. It's like, well, I thought you were interested in Buddhism, because that's, you know, let's have a discussion about the original. I don't want to know about the original. Here's the other thing people do. They'll think that, like, the truth has a shelf date like milk. Well, you know, that's old stuff, and, you know, stuff changes with the times, and, you know, this is the new improved Buddhism. Like the truth and the quest for wisdom and transcendence have a shelf life like a jug of milk. This is expired, man. This stuff's 2,600 years old. This is now, we got to get with the times. You got to have something new. We're going to call it the same old name, but we're going to completely reinvent. I was like, well, that has nothing or no connection with what it actually taught. Well, I don't care. Some people are like that. To me, they're amazing, and they're really amazing, not in a good way. I love to debate this topic because the original article is sublimely philosophically beautiful, and it is very simplex. It is a very simplex liberation ontology based in disobjectification, with phenomena, which of course is bred by primordial agnosis, seeing self in what is not self. And this identification phenomenology is the root of all becoming, the root of suffering, the root of false identity. That's all original Buddhism ever was. It's quite reducible to a single page. You could put everything that Buddhism teaches on a single page. I can anyway. I can easily do it. I've actually done it before many times. And I've gone over those ancient original texts so many hundreds of times, over and over and over again. I love the fact that the Theravadins gloss over all the pro-Atman or pro-soul passages. Instead of saying, take refuge in the soul, it says, take refuge in yourself. Here's another great secret of Buddhism. This is where modern Buddhism completely falls apart. Completely falls apart. Is that they'll use a reflexive. The original Pali will say, with the Attasarana, Nanasarana, Atta Dipa Viharate, dwell with the soul as your light and only refuge. And what a modern Buddhist will translate it as, mistranslate actually, is you yourself are the light, you yourself are the refuge. Well, that is a reference to the reflexive self. When you say yourself, myself, himself, we're talking about the psychophysical self. Rupa Vedana Sana Sankara Vijnana, which is in Pali, Maradhamma, the Dharma of Mara, i.e. evil, Dukkha, Anicca, Anatta. So the way these people purposely mistranslate those passages, they are actually saying, take refuge in evil, trust in evil, dwell with evil as your light. Because when you say yourself, myself, himself, in glossing over these pro-Atman, pro-soul passages, they are literally turning things upside down and backwards, where it becomes not only slightly off, but 180 degrees off. I tell these people that they don't care. I don't care. I think it's about trusting in yourself. Not a reflexive self. You can't take trust in the psychophysical. The psychophysical is ever in change. It's going to get old, sick, and fall apart. That's not the light. That's not the refuge. That has nothing to do with the actual I don't care. Some people just don't care about the truth at all. If you don't even care about the truth, why don't you care about common sense? And that is rather horrific. You could disagree with me, but you can't disagree on the Pali passages and what they actually say. Because there's nobody on this earth that knows more about the Dharma Nara and Anatman than I do. Not a single person, literally. And yet, if you do a Google search or a Bing search, they'll all tell you the same thing. Don't take my word for it, do it. Anatta means no soul. Buddhism taught that there was no soul, and that's why it's different from Hinduism. Oh, God. Oh, that's so wrong. It's just not true. Not only is it not true, it is really not true. Anybody on earth that wants to debate that topic, I'm always game. I'm your huckleberry. Repeat after me. You want to debate that topic? I'm your huckleberry. I've been doing it for decades. Never lost because I know what the passages say. Not only that, I can remember book and verse for all of it. I'll give you the Pali and let you translate it. Not that you can, but the Dharmanara and Atman is only used as a pejorative against phenomena and the psychophysical. This is just common Indian via negativa, or neti-neti. The Greeks called it apophaticism. Very, very common. Why would you even think of saying all the countless thousands of things that are not the soul? You just say there's no soul. What about this? That's not the soul. That's a total waste of breath. Nobody with a half a brain would do that. This is not the soul. That's not the soul. This isn't the soul either. You would not do that. Nobody would. You would say there is no soul. There's no such passage. There's no such passage. Did you like that video? Maybe you didn't. Maybe it perturbed you. Maybe it tickled you. I don't know. Thanks for watching.